As a robot builder, you have an end customer in mind. You understand their needs, their requirements at a deep level. One often underlooked area, which is make or break for disruptive technologies such as robotics, is the human psychology and behavior side of things. And that's what I want to double click with my next guest, Lindsay Ouellette. She's a research scientist specializing in human behavior at the intersection of technology, specifically robotics. She's an interesting person to talk to because she comes from a yoga background. She understands human behavior. She understands what causes seemingly good people to turn against technology, people to not adopt a new technology. And that is important if you're building robotics or any disruptive technology. I want to go deep with her on what can we learn from robotic companies that have failed to connect with their communities and user base. What can we draw from the backlash that has taken place, the violence and abuse that has been thrown towards robotics? Where does it come from? What can we do to mitigate it? Educate the public better, engage with the community better. That is the conversation I'm so excited to have with Lindsay. This is Robot Builders Club. I'm Ali Afzal. Let's go. All right, Lindsay, good morning. How you doing?
I'm all right. Hanging in there. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm doing great.
I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, same here. I saw your Substack, your posts, your views, and was like, this is perfect. I want somebody who can talk to the human side, psychology, behavior side of robotics. Your PhD. Could you talk a little bit about what focus of your research is? Let's go straight into that.
Yeah, sure. So I got my PhD at Temple University. My focus is social psychology, and my research has been in human robot interaction. So when I started there, I was working in a lab called RoboSnap, Robotic Social Navigation Amongst Pedestrians. And
Okay.
our lab was interdisciplinary. I was on obviously the psychology side, and then we had the computer scientists and mechanical engineers. And our goal was to make social AMRs move more naturally amongst pedestrians. But part of that was to develop technology based on actual human behavior. So we would run studies with humans, with the robot, with other obstacles, and we'd use that information to develop simulators. And then the robot would train on the simulator, and then we'd, put it out in the wild. And then you just kind of go through that loop of, continuing to refine and see how does the simulated environment, how is that in response to the robot in the wild, and just kind of making that better.
They're focusing on the aspect of how the humans interact, how they perceive the movement, the
Mhm.
behavior of the robot, right?
Yeah. And so part of what we also did on the psychology side was to really try to understand people's comfort around the robots and their perspectives. But then I ended up doing my dissertation on robot abuse and why people were abusing robots. So that was a little separate from our lab work.
Yeah. And that's what caught my eye, your article on that. So we'll get into that. But to start off with, let me get a little provocative. You said that robot companies out there, they're selling us a pornographic, quote unquote, pornographic version of robotics. What did you mean by that?
Well, Ali, I'm glad to know that someone other than my mom has read my Substack, at least one other person. So thank you for that. And mostly I'm just highlighting the discrepancy between curated fantasy and reality. And that really there's a huge disconnect between how robots are portrayed versus the actual state of the art of robotic technology.
Right. It's curated for views. They're doing all these maneuvers and picking up refrigerators and all this theatrics, which is to get the views, but not necessarily showcasing the challenges and where the robotic industry is necessarily headed, where robots are being useful, which you said is the boring industrial warehousing space. But what is What is wrong with that? What's the side effect of painting this fantasy imagery around robots?
Well, I think one of the side effects is that people get the wrong impression of what a robot is and what robots are actually being used. I mean, in my work, when I talk to, just regular people, which is most of the people that I talk to,
Yeah.
there's a big narrative that robots are going to take over. As people who are in the industry, we might laugh at that because we know that it's not really true, but people actually believe that. They think the Terminator, but when really the state of the art technology is like a Roomba or an automated forklift, or I don't know if you have the Marty robot in
Mm-mm.
California, but we have this robot in the grocery store that scans the shelves and checks for slip and falls. And they're not sexy. They're not sexy. And I think that that's just creating a huge disconnect.
Right. And I think your point is robots that are actually transforming the industries, manufacturing, consumer spaces that are actually getting the job done. They're the boring, boxy AMRs, arms working in different factories, cobots, and the robots getting all the attention right now are the dancing, flip-flopping, Boston Dynamic type of unitary type of humanoids, and it may not be apparent to people out there that it's probably taking months of choreography and orchestration to make them look the way they do, which is what you were referring to. So you think the tech industry is robotic industry, are they lying to us? They're lying to investors? Are they just lying to themselves? What's the end game here?
Think they're actively lying. Listen, part of being an entrepreneur and an innovator is having the ability to see things that others can't, is to have an idea and have people think you're batshit crazy, right? And there is a lot of promise and potential with humanoid robots, due to the growth and the popularity of AI. I think more specifically with, LLMs and ChatGPT, stuff like that. The reality is that humanoids represent such a small portion of the market, approximately 2 billion compared to, the industrial robotics, which is about approximately 43 billion, right? But like I said, automated forklifts don't get clicks. They don't boost the algorithms.
I see your point, right? It's as a founder, as an engineer that's working on a robot technology or robotic adjacent product, you're trying to draw attention to yourself in our hyper social media type of environment. You need eyeballs and you have to stand out somehow. So, which may disconnect the general public from the reality of things. And maybe that has something to do with the robot abuse. An aspect of that comes into the robot abuse because people may have different perception of what robots are actually meant to be and how they're going to be integrated in our lives in the future. But more on that, let's unravel it phase by phase, bit by bit. I want to start with your origin story, sort of your path. I think for viewers, my mom and a few other viewers that are actually listening would find your background very interesting. You went from the yoga side of things. I saw on your Substack, you went from teaching people how to breathe to studying why they're kicking robots and why they're abusing robots. At what point did you realize the two things are actually the same problem?
Yeah. So part of my origin story is that I'm also a trained dancer and I've been practicing yoga for 23 years and I had a business for 15 years. So it's been a big part of my adult life. One of the things that always intrigued me about the yoga practice, which is something that I obviously love a lot and something that has helped me and I know has helped a lot of people, but one of the things I couldn't understand was in this practice, all the gurus gone bad, right?
Mm,
So probably the most famous one is Bikram Chowdhury,
mm,
who was abusing and manipulating students. I was part of two communities over my career where the gurus had fallen from grace. And those are like really big, big scandals. There were also a lot of lower level things where teachers that I really liked and that were helping me. And then I would find out that, oh, wow, like they're kind of horrible people
Mm.
doing these things. And so when I started on this path back to school to get my master's degree in counseling psychology, I graduated in 2019. But as I was doing some research there, I started to become really interested in why seemingly good people do bad things. And when I started to look at the research, I was reading this book about abusing power and influence. And the authors said, based on his research, that 4 ways that you avoid abusing your power is to tell stories that unite, practice gratitude, be empathetic, and practice giving. And as I was reading this, I
Mm.
practically threw the book across the room. And I thought, hey, that's like what yoga teachers do. And yet they're still abusing their
Right.
power. Right. And so fast forward, COVID happens. And I know that I don't want to go into clinical work, but I'm still really drawn to this topic. And that's how I ended up landing at Temple with my advisor because he was interested in why seemingly smart people do stupid stuff. So it was
Mm.
like a natural fit, right? But when I started my PhD program, friends started sending me videos on Instagram of people beating up robots. Now, the food delivery robots, they were the food delivery robots in LA where they're much more common. And so I started to wonder, is this really a thing? So I got a little excited, not because I'm sadistic, but because I thought, oh, is this a way that I can actually study what I originally wanted to study, but just in a different context. And then turns out that robot abuse actually is a research topic, and a lot of people have researched it. And so that really opened the door for me to, still explore why seemingly good people do bad things just in a human robot context.
Yeah, a lot to unpack in your narrative there. The guru's gone bad, right? Yoga teachers that were supposed to be preaching empathy and helping somebody grow, and they're talking about centering themselves and all of that. That in a weird way I can sort of understand. I don't, of course, I'm not saying that's how it should be, but just power corrupts, right? You have power over so many people, and human beings oftentimes go into this space. The darkness takes over potentially, right? So
Yeah.
that part you see over and over again. Powerful people do horrible things.
Hmm.
It's I'm interested to understand why would normal, quote unquote normal person walking down the street would be kicking a delivery robot, tipping it over. And I'll put the videos for those that haven't seen those. Thank you for sharing some of those videos. What is, if you can put it in a concise way, what did you find out? Why is, forget Bikram, why is Bob walking down the street kicking the robot? What did you find out?
Well, there were a lot of things that I found out, but one thing I will say, Ali, is that we all have it in our heart, the line between good and evil and the ability to transform into agents
Mm.
of destruction. And I say that because I am a social psychologist and I take the perspective that people are not born bad. Rather,
Mm.
behavior and personality is shaped by environment and situation. So one possible explanation that term is from that perspective is that we have this cultural environment of, again, like robots being portrayed in ways that they're not, and cultural narratives from news
Mm.
and science fiction shaping the mental models and perceptions that people have of robotics.
It's Hollywood to blame. You're saying Terminator. We need more of Wall-E than we need those Terminator stories.
Well, there's that. Well, it's not just the Terminator, but robots being portrayed that are also good characters that have superhuman abilities as well. But we have to remember that for most people, their first source encounter with robots or really any emerging technology is through science fiction and media. So when robots and AI are sensationalized, that does have an effect on public perception and acceptance. We also know that controversial content gets more clicks and likes, and that algorithms are designed to promote that stuff to the top. So I say that's why like watching the news is so depressing, right? It's all bad stuff. It's all, it's what gets the click, mundane everydayness that doesn't sell. It's uninteresting.
Yeah. So are we doomed to be stuck in this sort of perception loop? How do we portray the right stories? How do we float those up? Is it just public education and we have to work on ourselves and center ourselves and practice gratitude and breathing and become better human beings and seek out better content, and that's how we fight the machine? Or what's the answer? What do you think?
I mean, there's always room for improvement, right, Ali? Like all across the board. But to say, sorry, can you go back to what was the question? Sorry, I got distracted.
It was like a rhetorical question, I guess,
Okay.
right? That we we're all naturally seeking things that grab our attention, and that's what the algorithm feeds. It's sort of that in the moment, the violence, sex, and sexiness, and some of these baser, more primal human instincts, when they are floated up through the algorithm, that's what catches our eye, which is what's happening in the world
Yeah.
of robotics as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I don't really know the answer to, why people are so attracted to like watching um, a car crash or a burning
Mm,
building, right? But in this paradigm of social media, we live in this time where it's like instead of getting your phone out to call help, they're taking a video of it. I mean, that's a
mm.
little not my area of expertise, but I don't really know why people are doing that.
So I went through your Substack and I came across this argument you were making that how we treat robots reveals something about our moral character, not theirs.
Hmm.
So what
Yeah.
what are we revealing?
Yeah. So I did a bunch of research on why people kick robots. And at the end of my study, I asked participants the last thing that I asked them, I said, to please describe and provide rationales to why you chose to kick or not kick the robot. And one of the interesting findings was that people often describe themselves as holding the moral high ground, like saying that it's wrong to kick the robot. It's bad. It's not who I am. However, when I offered them $100 to kick the robot, they had no problem kicking it. And what that reveals is what we call in psychology the say do gap, right? So that there's a big difference between what people say or how they think about themselves versus their actual behavior or their actions.
That's an interesting point. You think we are aware of this gap? We knowingly do this, or it's subconscious to us?
I think that it's unconscious, right? But that was a big finding for me, and that's when I realized, like, it is like we can talk about like the robots, but it is about human behavior and
Mm,
how humans interact with things, robots, chat GPT, other
yeah.
humans.
And also, that also reminds me a little bit about those mobile scooters that were being deployed all over the different cities, right? They're Lime and all of these scooters that were starting to litter the streets. And a lot of cities fought back against it. People got tired, even though it provides utility. It may not be exact example, same use case, but people were abusing those scooters as well. There were stories of people picking them up and throwing them off freeways and into canals, and
Oh my
not
goodness.
just destroying those
That's
scooters. And a lot of it stemmed from the way they were deployed and forced down the throat of
hmm
city dwellers. Taking the devil's advocate approach, do you think the abuse and sort of the way people are handling these robots on some level, do you think it's on some part justified? Do you think it's understandable given how quickly these deployments are taking place, not necessarily taking into account of what the people from that city want or are asking for?
I don't think that any type of violence is justified.
That's a yoga teacher in you coming out.
But, there's also a saying in psychology that just because you can explain behavior, but you can't,
Mm,
but that doesn't mean we excuse behavior. So
yeah.
we can understand why people do bad things, right? And we can have an understanding of that. But that doesn't mean that we excuse
Mm,
what people do, right? And we might try to understand this behavior because, like you said, like, these companies are just like dumping things into the public space and just saying, hey, people, just deal with it. You know, people don't like that, you know?
yeah, yeah.
And one of the things that I wrote about was like that public leaders and community leaders could have some sort of PSA or something to explain and say, hey, this is going to be happening, right? And just let the people know what's going on. How is this going to benefit the community? How is this going to benefit the environment, right? People just want to know what's going on rather than having stuff being sprung upon them. People want to be informed. And one of the things I think of a lot was actually at the beginning of COVID. There was a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and withholding of information about what the heck was going on. And what happened? We have what I call toilet paper gate. People
Yeah.
were hoarding toilet paper. And it wasn't necessarily because people like needed all this toilet paper, but it was a way for them to create control and security in a situation that they felt they had no um, security and control over. And when you start like dumping things unexpectedly into people's community, that's unsettling. Even when I saw the food delivery robot for the first time, like I study robots, I work with robots. And the first time I saw it, like I was like, whoa, just surprised. I felt a little unsettled, right? And people want to feel safe and secure in the space that they inhabit and in their community.
Yeah, got it. Violence is not justified. Understood. But is it really violence if I'm kicking a robot that doesn't have feelings? Where's the violence committed?
I think it's common to think about abuse and violence as really big, catastrophic events. What actually happens are more ordinary types of harms, right? So while kicking a robot certainly does not hurt it, but it definitely reflects our attitudes towards technology and robotics as they become
Mm,
integrated into everyday life, and part of what feeds that could be like these cultural narratives, it also just everyday aggression.
yeah,
And, do we really want to live in a society where it's just okay to kick things?
kick things.
And again, it's like, yeah, it's not hurting the robot, but Ali, like, what does that say about you if you're just going to kick something?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
it's there.
I need to take a yoga class. I need to figure out what's happening up here in my mind, what's leading to it. Yeah, makes sense. And
Mhm.
I saw that you're in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania declared delivery robots as legal pedestrians. What I found that interesting. What is that about and why that distinction?
Yeah. So the law was enacted in 2021 that it defines a food delivery robot as a pedestrian. And what that means is that it's just allowing the robot to exist on the sidewalk. It's just saying legally you can have a food delivery robot. But
Mm,
really other than that, it's pretty vague. Also, the year after in 2022, the former governor also enacted a law that allowed for testing and deployment of AVs as well. One thing about that I think is unique about that law in my own research is that food delivery robots actually hit the scene in Pittsburgh years before, like end of 2021, like right around this law being enacted in 2022, well before in Philadelphia. My guess is that, Pittsburgh is home to Carnegie Mellon University, which, you probably know is like a huge
right.
robotics,
Yeah.
computer
CMU.
science. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's huge for that. So I can see why those things were landing in Pittsburgh first. But the funny thing is, It's pretty much if you live in Philadelphia, like, that's kind of off your radar. I don't know if you can imagine the state of Pennsylvania, but, like, it's really big and
Yeah.
it's really wide. I think it's 6 hours driving without traffic from Philly to Pittsburgh.
Wow.
It's really far away, and so a lot of things that happen in Pittsburgh, like, it's not even, like, on our radar. I mean, I'm not even sure, like, Pittsburgh's a real place. Like, I haven't been there. Like, I'm just not sure. I'm just kidding. Having these laws, I think my opinion is that it was more forward thinking. And, you know, before we started recording, you were talking about the sidewalks and the streets being, like, kinda small. You don't have to cross over, which is
Mm.
it's nice if you're walking, but if you're driving, it's kind of horrible. And one of the biggest problems with just the infrastructure of Philadelphia is that it was developed a long time ago without considering population growth and getting bigger. So now everything is just so like traffic is just so congested. The sidewalks are small. And so I think it's good that we have these laws that can allow us to move into the future. But again, they're pretty basic and ambiguous, but it also gives us the room as they start to integrate our spaces to say, hey, how do we start to refine this more? So it's not just a pedestrian, but when things start to happen, how do we start to evolve it more? I think it's easier to probably add on than to like try to take away things.
Yeah. And follow up to that, I read in your post that you argued Philadelphia should have treated the robot rollout as a public communications opportunity.
Hmm.
So there was a miss there. And
Hmm.
instead, companies just drop them on sidewalks, similar to what we were talking about with the Lime scooters. Is that just arrogance, negligence, or sort of, just classic tech? Let's move fast. Let's learn after the fact. Let's not incorporate human side of things mentality.
Ali, I say all of the above. So, if we look at the research, the gold standard for successful human robot interaction is for the robot to assimilate with the human, not the other way around. So, when you just dump robots into a community, which we talked about before, it doesn't create the conditions for successful assimilation. Yes, there could have been more communication between Uber Eats, public leaders, even business leaders. Again, how is this going to help small businesses? How is this going to help the congestion problem that I just described in Philadelphia, right? There could have been better efforts to boost morale around this because I am a believer that, technology is here to make our lives better, but we also know that, I mean, part of the human condition, people don't like change. And when you add something new, it's upsetting. Like, I mean, I even remember when just regular Lyft and Uber X hit the scene. People were up in arms about
Yeah.
that. So, yeah, I just think people just want to know what's going on.
Yeah. There's an opportunity for better involvement, collaboration. If you're a founder that's trying to launch robotics or any massive sort of disruptive type of technology, engage your consumers at large better. I don't know if they're not doing that on purpose or it's just a constraint of financing and focus on product development. And this doesn't quite hit the list of priority in terms of you have limited funding and you're trying to develop this company. Now you're going to engage the public. How is that going to happen? That time spent and that just gets neglected.
Hmm.
Again, this is a rhetorical question. I don't know the answer to it. I don't know if you have thoughts around it.
Well, as you were talking, one of the things that, I thought of is there are the companies who are creating the robots. And then, so for example, in Philadelphia, we have AV Ride, which is developing the actual robot. But then you have Uber Eats, who's buying the robot. And then it's actually Uber Eats who's implementing and deploying these. So, how do we start to bridge those things? 'Cause isn't necessarily like AV Ride's job since they're just making the food, like making these things for Uber
Yeah.
Eats. They're not deploying them themselves, right? Feel like these parts of the process are probably really siloed. And what we need to do is we need to create more bridging between them,
Dialogue.
right? I
Yeah.
mean, also part of developing really good I mean, we need to have really good technology, right? We need to have that. But, I still would say that one, AV Ride still needs to be considering the human aspect of this to develop better technology. And then when Uber Eats goes to finally deploy this, they need to be also considering the humans and the people in the community as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Would that look in practice? Town halls, you bring people together, you say this is we're deploying these yoga robots that will be in the parks and they will deliver yoga to you and help you feel better. And you
Actually, that's
invite
not a
these
bad that
people.
Ali, that's not a bad idea. Having
Let
like
me
a nice
patent that.
little you can just hop into a yoga class in the park with a robot. They never get tired. I think
Yeah.
that's a great idea.
Would you I'm not a big yoga person, but would you take yoga classes from super flexible robot?
I mean, it's not off the table. I mean, to talk about something that's completely unrelated to robotics,
Yeah.
I don't, the yoga community has changed a lot. And the type of yoga that I like to practice has shifted a lot since COVID to be a lot more fitness and workout focused versus like meditative and things like that. So, you know what? If there was a robot teaching a class and it was trained in the style that I like, I might, who knows? I might do that.
Yeah, that's well, you're forward thinking. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I think I would probably, if I'm a beginner, I would have a pause on that. I would have concerns around what does the robot know about a regular human body? You don't know
Oh,
how I
yeah. I mean,
move.
yeah, I don't think it would be for a beginner. For me, Lindsay specifically, I might be into that because I've been doing it for so long and I know how to practice safely. No, I think if you're a beginner, I think being with a human teacher is better.
Yeah. Okay, coming back to the topics of launching robots and launching companies within robotics. If you could force every robotic CEO to understand one thing about human psychology before their next deployment, what would it be? Just one thing.
So I would tell them that people are extremely complicated and unpredictable. And when we think of people moving through or between the indoor spaces we inhabit, they don't walk or behave exactly the same way twice. I think of myself, I walk to the gym several times a week, but my behavior is different if I'm listening to music, talking on the phone. I'm in a rush, I'm not in a rush. I'm in a good mood, I'm in a bad mood. These small factors all change how I move. But at the same time, humans are surprisingly predictable in one important way, and that we're highly malleable. So, given the right conditions, we adapt and we can shift our behavior. So, if you're deploying robots into human spaces, you're not just dropping a machine into a neutral environment. You need to be shaping the conditions that will reliably nudge human behavior in one direction or another. And that's why robotics leaders, if I was to tell them, say one thing, is that they need to catch up with the science and actually hire HRI experts, people like me, to design deployments that work for humans, not just for machines.
The key insight for me while you were describing it was that you're different people depending on
Mhm.
the circumstances and what you're going through. The same person, like you said, depending on what's happening, what time of the day, what you've gone through, what's happening in your life, could respond differently and may have different preferences. Understanding that, accounting for that variance, that variability in the same individual,
Mhm.
that means having larger sample size, um, understanding human behavior at a deeper level. What is that actually? What is the action item that a founder would take from that?
Yeah. So, like I said, we're describing that humans are unbelievably complicated, complex, and unpredictable. But at the same time, we can adapt to anything. And so
Mhm.
the focus would be more on how do we shape behavior? It's not that we need to study, put sensors on a bunch of people and then monitor and measure how they walk to the same place
Mm,
over time. I mean, that's just a lot, right?
Mm.
So we have to focus on how people are adaptable and malleable and how they can shift and change behavior. And so that's why we need why these founders and CEOs need to hire psychologists to help nudge people to be, I don't want to sound mind control, but like nudge
Yeah.
people to behave in the way that we want, but really so that there can be more successful deployment and successful human robot interaction. And there's a lot of science about, you know, nudging people. There's a book called Nudge that's really great. There's a lot in behavioral science about how do we like just slow move people towards certain directions versus other directions, right? And so that actually gives the founders and CEOs a lot of control, and they're not taking
Mm.
advantage of that.
Got it. So in terms of adoption of a certain technology, adoption of a robot, we want to nudge somebody to say this yoga robot would be great for you, but you want to tell the right story. You want
Mhm.
to pull on the right human behavior psychology levers. Again, I'm sounding like mind control, but that's
Yeah, we don't really we
yeah.
can just say we don't mean mind control.
Yeah. But, is that what you mean? Like, part of it is storytelling, part of it is features built into the robot itself, taking psychology, behavior, preferences, all of that into account of the design of the robot so that trust is built and you see what is being deployed as something useful, that's something that can coexist in your space and it's not threatening. Like,
Yeah.
is that
Yeah, a little bit. In terms of this is just getting like really into like staunch behaviorism, but like, you know, people behave in a certain way because they're either being rewarded for a behavior or punished for a behavior, right? And so we want to create the conditions so that they're always feeling like they're being rewarded. But sometimes, especially like maybe not in like for the food delivery robots, but in like more in industrial settings, right? We can really go in and analyze workflows of how people are working, and we want to implement automation. So, but first we have to understand, well, what is their process, right? We have to map that out and understand what they're doing. And, sometimes people are doing things we don't want them to do. So as like an employer, I need to try to figure out like, is the desired behavior that I want of my worker is that what I want them to do? Is that actually punishing them? And so the reason they're doing this other behavior is actually rewarding them, right? So we have to try to get the desired behavior to be a reward, but also figure out like, well, why is this punishing them? And it might be like an ergonomic situation. Well, maybe it hurts their back to lean down or do something. I'm just making something up,
yeah.
right? So we have to think of it behaviorally in terms of rewards and punishments for what they're doing. And if we can start to understand that and that creating interactions that are rewarding and not punishing to people, we can create the
Mhm.
conditions for that.
Yeah, because people are looking for utility, something
Hmm.
that actually helps them. Either it's helping creating convenience, it's saving them time, money, and helping them understand that utility, removing that friction is the key to a successful adoption. It doesn't even have to be robotics. That's true for
Hmm.
any technology. Makes sense. So let me ask a broader, big, chunky question. After everything you've researched about human behavior, we talked about the abuse, the misperceptions, the ignorance from the founder side and from common public. Are you actually optimistic about the future and how the future of robotics and this society we're gonna create with physical AI and these devices out there?
Definitely. I am definitely optimistic. And that's part of why I study this work. I'm I'm optimistic about the future of AI and robotics because I want us to get this right. And so whenever people talk about AI, the conversation is usually split into two versions, right? We have a dystopian future or a more utopian one. Obviously, I want the better version, but if we want better deployments of technology, and we've been talking about this, we really do have to understand the human side of this too, right? And so this means understanding dehumanization, aggression, fear, status, loneliness, and how people, psychologically respond to systems that are increasingly occupying, the social world. Because my research isn't just about robots, it's about people, and what makes someone willing to kick a robot or harm a robot. These questions tell us something important about how ordinary environments and incentives can normalize aggression. But at the same time, I think technology has enormous potential to improve human life, and especially if we deploy it thoughtfully. The whole point to me, like the whole point of technology is not or sorry, is supposed to like make life easier and better for
Yeah. Yeah.
people.
Utility. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but we at the same time, like, we live in this culture that glamorizes busyness, that associates achievement with, like, grind culture and working 1,000 hours a week. We have epidemics of loneliness, anxiety, and burnout. So why shouldn't AI and robotics, like, help carry some of the load?
Yeah.
You know, I would I would love a future where AI handles more of that more repetitive, the draining tasks, so people can have more time for creativity, family, and community.
Hmm.
You know, with this here's my utopian version is like, yeah, let's have that 4-day work week that we talk about all the time. So for me, studying violence isn't about becoming cynical about technology. It's quite the opposite, but I need to understand it in order to try to make it better and make a future that is better for people, right? And the future that we actually want.
Hmm. No, beautiful thought. What you're saying makes a lot of sense, and it's a hopeful future that we want it all. We all want, and we want to. I think everybody in that space strives for. I think my understanding, or at least my belief, is I think 80-90% of the common people out there are good people. We're looking to do what's right by our family, our community, our society. And the 20% that you see are just making wrong decisions in that moment.
Mhm.
They're having a bad day, or they've just been dealt a bad hand and they're reacting out a certain way. As you were painting your picture of utopia and what you would want the world to see, got me thinking, do you think men are the problem? Do we these bros, these Zuckerbergs and Bezoses, is in a world where women were the CEOs of these tech companies, do you think it would be different, or it's not really about gender and more so about what power does?
That's a really good question. I need to meditate on
Mm,
that for 2 seconds. Ali, what I can say is that all the leaders in tech are men. Most of the leaders in the world are men. I think research will show that typically, men can be more violent, tend towards those things. I'm not saying that they are, but I think it's just because
Testosterone is a
yeah, I was gonna say
thing.
it's
Yeah.
testosterone. I'm like, I'm not an expert in that, right? But people can have like more levels of testosterone that makes them that way, and it's all part of like evolutionary
Hmm.
biology and things
Yeah,
like
we're
that.
biochemical machines, and some machines are more prone to violence, and then
Yeah, and we also know that people like leaders tend to hire people that look and remind them of themselves, and I as a woman breaking into this industry, I think that there could be I would like to see more room for, right? Cuz like I said, we do need the space for like the technical things, but we also need like the softer side of things, bring that humanistic viewpoint to technology. And we have to put the important thing is that we have to put people first, right? And if we have like what I'm seeing in my life experience and history is that it's really only a certain gender that's been doing things, like what am I supposed to
mm,
think? Well, I love like
yeah.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, like, there'll be true equality when we have a whole Supreme Court that's all women, not half and half, right? So, I mean, these are bigger topics that I haven't really
Yeah.
thought of, but
Yeah.
it is
That
definitely
requires a separate conversation, but
yeah,
yeah,
but
I also think about that, right? It's an interesting thought that if we want that utopia, if we want a positive future, we want the human side that being represented, all of the topics that we talked about, and the voices, more feminine voices, more classically caring and more empathetic, more in tuned with human social fabric and community, which tends to be more feminine voices or at least classically. So there's definitely opportunity for us to get more inclusive.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of stereotypes in a lot of career fields. Tech is one that is gendered as male, it's male dominated, but then we also have more what they call like more feminine type of careers, which are, teaching, being a
Yeah.
nurse, things like that. And I wish it wasn't that way. Society, we like to put labels on things, and cultural or identity politics are big right now. But the thing is, whenever you have something skewed too much to one side, that might be problematic.
Yeah.
I think
So we
you
have to be
ideally want to
mindful of
have
that.
like yeah, I think it's important to have balance and not just have like tech bros and like put your head down and make
Mm,
robots and make cool things, but no, like, we have to consider so many different things, right? Not just creating technology, but wanting to deploy that out in the real world.
yeah. Awesome conversation. I think I could talk to you for hours. Lindsay, thank you for sharing your research, and I'll be following your Substack and what you do. But before I let you go, we're approaching time. I want to get into the lightning round, which is I'm gonna throw a whole bunch of questions at you really, really fast and get your first instincts. Don't think too
Okay,
much. Just give us what comes to your mind. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
Breathe in and let's dive in with the first question. You encounter a delivery robot out there blocking a corner, confused. Are you going to help it or walk past it?
I would help it if it looked like it was stuck, but if it's a software issue, I might not be able to help it.
Got it.
Mhm.
Elon's Optimus. Is it the humanoid? Is it a breakthrough or it's porn?
Porn.
Why?
Oh, just what we were talking about earlier. It's not real. I went to the Tesla showroom. They had one at the mall, and they had the Optimus in the case. And I'm like, what good is this? It's just a bunch of robots in cases. you know, you can't do anything. They don't have a demo. Nothing.
Yeah,
So
makes sense. Yeah, I'm with you. A robot takes your meal order perfectly. Are you going to say thank you at the end of it?
yes,
Why? It doesn't have
I'm
feelings.
just a polite person, Ali.
I get it. What you do anything reflects into what you do everything, right?
Exactly.
Finish this sentence. The robotics industry's biggest enemy is blank.
Itself. There is too fast itself.
And we got to change that, right?
Yeah.
And with some of those things that we just talked about.
Yeah.
Someone kicks a robot on the street right in front of you. What are you going to do?
Probably run.
Away? Or
Yeah, run
two?
away. I mean, my first, and, I would like to like call somebody out, but I'm also, I do have street smarts. I don't want to get hurt myself. And so if somebody's aggressing or being violent, I don't want to put myself in a situation where I could potentially get hurt.
Right. It's not going to serve anybody.
Yeah.
Okay, let's be honest. When you saw the Philly delivery robot for the first time, what did you want to do?
Well, I was a little unsettled. Like, I was just stunned at first, but this is going to sound really weird. I kind of felt it was like a little like pet. I wanted to like just go up and like pet it and be like, oh my goodness, you're here.
Well, does it have like human-like features, eyes and...
It has these blinking heart eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like kind of funny.
Okay, you
I
found
don't
it
know.
cute.
I have, because I'm in this space, I do have an affection. I do have an affection for AMRs and robots.
Okay, makes sense. Yoga or robots? Which community has more ego?
Probably robotics. Yeah. But I wouldn't say that the difference is too large.
That's why we got to marry the two, bring that yoga robot idea that we came up with. So let's launch that company. I think that's where we collaborate.
Yeah, exactly. Any
Co-founders.
investors listening to this, hit us up.
I like that. A robot or a human, who would make a better podcast guest?
I think it depends, Ali. I've definitely listened to some people that were not interesting. So maybe there would be a scenario where the robot would be a better guest than a human.
I
But
like that answer. Yeah, depends. Yeah. Um, Tell me one thing that robot founders are most in denial about.
googly eyes in humans.
Okay, elaborate.
I just think, I think one of the funny things about one of the humanizing design features for a lot of AMRs are the googly eyes. I just think let a robot be a robot. Do we have to put these ridiculous googly eyes on it?
I find your comment interesting because I thought we were trying to connect with humans, and if you make something more human-like, wouldn't that be a good thing? They're trying to make the machine cute and more approachable.
Yeah, so we didn't really get into this, but my research found that humanizing the robot didn't actually act as a protective factor against abuse. Less about what a robot looks like is not as important than how people think about robots.
But doesn't that help? Like the looks don't they help in how people think about it? Like if I see a robot with like a smile, I would go, "Oh, yeah, that's a friendly being."
You're right, but it doesn't act as a protective factor against abuse. So you can have robots look as cute as you want, but if people think something about it or feel some kind of way, that smile or those googly eyes ain't going to do anything to protect
Mm.
that robot.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, yeah. Something for founders out there to really think about. All right, last question. You take a time machine, you travel to 2050, you come back. How does the world look at in the future?
2050. I don't expect that it will look too much different than it does now. Hopefully by 2050, we've been able to integrate technologies and AI and robotics to make our life better. Like I said, I'm hopeful. I hope that, you know, tech companies and industry continue to put people first. I just hope that in 2050, life is better for everyone in some sort of way, and that we've kind of moved through this transition or maybe growing pains, right? To be more settled into a new way of life.
Yeah, hopeful message. I think
Uh,
we figure it out in the long run. We've gone
Yeah.
through worse things. COVID was an example of it. I think people thought world was ending. We overcome it if we're engaging with each other. There's dialogue. We're bringing the change happens at a more localized level at the community and at the city space. So coming back to what we were talking about, it's that public engagement,
Mhm.
it's understanding human psychology, behavior, working on ourselves, centering ourselves, that
Yeah.
yoga piece, right? We're all understanding that we're all work in progress. We have amazing capabilities, but also all of these dark places that we need to be mindful of, and all of these weakness that we need to constantly work on. And if we all educate ourselves and be mindful of that, I think the future will be a better.
Yeah. I'm hopeful for it.
Awesome. On that note, I think I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing your research, and we'll stay connected. And would love to have you on a second episode to talk more about um, once we launch this yoga robot.
They did come up, it might have been in Japan or China, probably China, this Buddhist robot, because all the elders in the temples are dying and no one's there to replace them. So
Really?
yeah, they designed like a Buddhist robot to lead meditations.
That wasn't a Unitree. I've seen Unitree doing like the kung fu, and this was different.
I don't remember the company,
Okay.
but I just
Yeah.
the robot was in the garb and stuff, and it's like, oh,
Mm.
it's there to eventually take over when all the elders die and they don't have people to replace them.
Yeah, and I was seeing other like Asian countries, especially China, seems to be incorporating robots much more seamlessly.
Mhm.
Mm. I don't know if there's a cultural element to it where, they're
Yeah, I mean, there is literature on this. out there on this, is that just to be very general, that Eastern cultures, Eastern traditions have it's more common for them to give sentience to inanimate objects, and they just tend to have more respect for things than we do in Western cultures, and particularly the United States. And I think that there is a difference, and there's more acceptance of technology and innovation and things like that, and people just respect them more. I was recently listening to an interview with this guy who was the ambassador to Japan under the Obama administration, and I actually think he's going to be running for president in 2028. But he was talking so highly about Japan and their culture and just how respectful they are of each other and of things. And the interviewer said, if there was one thing that you could take from the Japanese culture and just implement it into the United States, like what would it be? And he said that we could have our 5-year-old kids walk to school alone. And that's what they do in Japan.
Mm,
It's just so different the way they have such reverence for life and for people and for things that 5-year-olds can walk to school on their own. And that's not we don't have the same kind of reverence in Western culture generally. Generally.
yeah. I think maybe it's part of the values we have. Individualism
Mhm.
has its strength. And then once you have a sort of hive sort of society view of yourself, you bring into your sphere maybe um public things as well, and that creates more harmony, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Like, Western individualistic, it's like, well, what can you do for me? What can society do for me
Mm,
versus what can I do for society?
yeah.
Mhm.
All right, Lindsay, let me get some yoga in, and we'll talk soon.
Look forward to it,
Thank you
Ali.
so
Thanks so
much.
much. All right.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.